Welcome to applying for a GIS grant from the New York State Archives, and the presenter will be Geof Huth from the New York State Archives. And with that, Geof, I'll kind of turn it over to you.
Okay, everybody. We're going to talk about applying for a grant. We're going to be focused on somebody thinking about doing a GIS grant. So there will be some slides that you see where I won't talk about everything on them because they're not all applicable, but I want to keep that context for you to see. So that'll be simple enough. Here's the big thing to know. Here's the thing that will hurt you if you're writing a GIS grant and you do not remember this, and you do not write a grant application that is constantly, always, without fail, thinking about this: records. Your project has to be about records. It has to be about government records. It has to be about government records, focused on the government records of the local government participants involved. And so let's take a couple of seconds to think about this. If you have a GIS and you're trying to run it only with the records from the geospatial records from a single local government or a single group of local governments, you're never going to have a GIS. You know you're going to get data from all other sources, and that is fine. All we're saying is that your project has to focus on the records that you have in a GIS or the records you want to put in GIS and how you manage those records. And if you do that, you're going to be far along the road to a successful grant, because this rule, not following this rule, is the major thing that kills GIS grant applications to us. So we got some deadlines coming up, and I'm going to tell you about these because it is a sad thing that we're talking this late in the season, because unless you're the one person who's writing a grant application already, you're going to have very little time to put a grant application together if you haven't started one yet. So a couple of things to tell you about. First, in order to apply, you have to have a user account in our eGrant system. And the deadline for asking for such a user account, if you don't have one, is the 24th of February. Now, I don't know if you all come from local governments or whatever, but if you're in a local government that wants to apply for the grant, the user account will be with the records management officer of that government. In most governments, that can be anybody, but in a town or a village, it'll be the clerk. So keep that in mind. If that person has a user account, you have a user account, because there's only one user account per local government. And then the deadline is going to be March 3rd. I didn't take out the schedule because when we originally had this data up, it wasn't finalized. But March 3rd, just a couple of weeks away really, is the deadline. So it doesn't give you much time. And there are the other dates there that tell you how the project continues into the future. You need to know this. Basic eligibility requirements. Number one is we only give grants to local governments. So you have to be a local government of any kind. There are 4,500 local governments in the state, 4,500 plus. So the chances of you being a local government is really high. But the other thing you need to do is you need to have a records management officer appointed by the local government. So you need to make sure that you don't have one of those. Again, in a village or a town, it's pretty easy because they always have one. And you have to adopt a retention schedule that's appropriate to your local government, saying that you're following it, and therefore you have something to guide how long you keep records. You have something to tell you when to throw the records away. And note, you have to have this in place as you apply. You can't say it's in progress. And if your government has had any previous projects, well, then you're going to have to tell us one other, you're not going to have to tell us one other thing. You're going to have all your final reports in from that project, those projects. Otherwise, the application won't go forward for review. So we have three types of grants. Do we want to talk about all of them? No. We only want to talk about one type of grant, and you may have guessed it's the one that's bolded in the middle of the page, shared services. We want to talk only about shared services now because the requirement of any GIS grant is that it be a shared service grant. There can be other kinds of shared service grants, but all GIS grants have to be shared services. The reason behind this, just so you know, is that we believe that it makes most sense for us to encourage people to work cooperatively on GIS projects, put together, shared projects that multiple governments can work on. And so this helps us encourage that situation. Note that in a grant like this, you can apply for up to $150,000. So in the shared services grant, you can apply for twice as much money as you could ask for in an individual grant, which is a grant only a single local government. The one thing that helps you about shared services grants too is it's a priority for funding, and because of that, it improves your chances. Your chances of success will be lower for an individual grant, for instance, than for a shared services grant, because of this priority. So this will give you a sense of how those priorities work. We used to try to figure out how to give priority to things, and then I said one day, well, there's only one way to show priority, and that's to give money to it. And so if you look at these numbers and you just look at them, abstractly, just look at the numbers themselves, you might decide that, geez, individual grants, they are getting the most money. So you must have a much greater chance to get an individual grant. In actual fact, that does not happen. It doesn't happen because the applications we get for individual grants are far in excess of the numbers that we get for any other kinds of grant applications. So shared services here gets $1 million, which is 35% of the money left over after we give mayoral agencies the money that they are required by law, which is $1 million. And so this $1 million is usually pretty sufficient to support any of the good grant applications that are submitted to us. In individual grants, we actually don't get all the money we need to support all the good grant applications. So that's one good piece of news. One thing that you need to know of, because if you work on a GIS application and you're coming from a GIS unit or a planning department or something like that of your government, it might be that somebody else in your government is applying for a grant. So you have to see if that is indeed the case. It might affect how you apply, whether you apply, things like that. So any local government can have one grant of any kind. So it could be individual, shared services, demonstration, whatever. Plus, they can get some other grants. You can get a small disaster management grant, or if you're a county, there can be a grant for a community college. Here's why this is important for you to know. If you're in a county, for instance, and want to apply for a grant, but the county's grant is only for a community college, that means you can still apply for a grant. So to find out if you're applying for a grant or not, you should find out who your RMO is and talk to that person. If you don't know who it is, we should be able to figure it out for us, so you can give us a call. So here's what you need to do to get ready for writing a grant application. Make sure you're registered in the system. Figure out what your needs are, because as I say, you've got to have needs. You've got to have problems. We can't help you if you don't have problems. So identify those needs and then talk to people to try to figure out how to solve it. So even if you're working with on a GIS grant application, talk to your regional advisory officer, which we call an RAO, or talk to other archive staff. You can, drop me a line, give me a call, and I can talk to you about it, to just test some of your thoughts, see if you're going in the right direction, and, ask questions. Big thing to do, and use that to develop a solution. Big thing to do is read the grants application guide, what we call the request for applications, or the RFA, or the grants booklet, or a whole bunch of other things. But read that. There are lots of details in it, and we are now guided by details, some that come from us, some that come from other places, and you need to make sure you address every detail that comes up in your kind of application. Lucky for you, we're going to talk about most of those today. Of course, conduct some research, try to figure out what's the best way to move forward before applying for a grant application. So since you have to write a shared services grant application, what is a shared services grant? It is a grant that has 2 or more local governments involved. There have to be at least 2. The upper number is limitless. Could be 1 million. Well, could be 4,500. They have to be cooperating on this grants project. They all have to be involved in this grant project, signatories to it, and they have to provide evidence that they want to be part of it. The shared services grants has to be designed to develop a permanent arrangement. That means you're going to say, for GIS, we're going to solve this GIS problem together, and then we're going to keep this GIS or this GIS application or this GIS functionality or these GIS records going together. That's what we're going to do, because you're trying to solve a shared problem. And so shared services forces everybody together to find the problems they have together and that they can work on more valuably and with less money overall together. So here are some of the advantages that we talked about shared services. You can ask for more money. You're more likely to be funded because it's a priority. But also it gives you a permanent solution. Theoretically, it's like you're not going to set up, there's no GIS you're going to set up or any GIS solution you're going to set up that's going to last forever. But you're going to have a permanent solution of cooperation. You're going to have a network of people working together, even if it's a small network, so that you can keep your GIS running and manage the records within that GIS well, and you're going to save money. And those savings of money, they affect us as the state archives because we don't have to award as much money, but they also affect you. They help your governments save money as well. So when you think about shared services, there are different models or arrangements, you could call them, that people have put together. One is a service provider model. And keep in mind, neither of these models is better than the other. It just depends on your situation which one can work. And I should have written both of these for a GIS, but I didn't think about it. So let's make this first service provider model be a GIS example. Here's what a GIS example would be. A county, for instance, decides that it is going to be the main repository of geospatial data for all the local governments, or so let's just say the towns and other municipalities within its borders. And so what it's doing is it's going to provide a lot of the major services. It's going to have the people with the expertise, but they're going to be helping other local governments take care of their records, help them get access to records, and other people are going to have workstations that they can use to get into the GIS, to use the data in all the normal ways they want to. In a shared responsibilities model, which is the second model, you could have, which we've had examples of in the recent past, actually the recent current, groups of towns and villages together sharing a GIS, sharing the GIS responsibilities, sharing the responsibilities of actually creating the GIS and make it function. And any one of these can work. We know that the world is different across the face of the planet. So in some places, the more efficient service provider model is not always going to work, and you're going to have the shared responsibilities model, and that's fine. Because what we can do is the more we can get people together, the more valuably we can use the money that we have to give away. And we think a lot about that money now because we have half as much as we used to have. So it makes us feel bad. So here are some requirements of a shared services grant. So these are the things you need to keep in mind. When you start applying for a grant, you're going to have to say in part of the narrative how you've met these requirements. So think about this. Very, very important. You have to say it in the right place. You have to say why you need this project. So the thing can't be, geez, we need to upgrade our system or something like that. It can't be that. Why do you need the project? And it has to be records focused. You have to tell us why doing this project will help you manage your records better and help you with records management better. And we'll talk about the breadth of what that includes a little later on. We want to know about the advantages of this project. How are you going to save money? How is administration going to be easier? Or, maybe it won't be easier, but talk about whatever advantages there are. and give us, whenever you can, concrete information. We've had shared services grants that have done good cost-benefit analyses to demonstrate that if we fund this project, we're going to have more savings in the next 2 years than we paid in this grant. So we're going to be able to save local governments more money than we paid for in the grant, and that to us tells us it's a valuable project, using our money in the best way possible. And talk about these advantages as they affect you mutually, as they affect everybody. Sometimes the advantages are going to differ from place to place, which is fine, but tell us how being together is important to make this work. You have to tell us some basic information about all the participants so we know who they are. We know what they can do and what they can't do, and even what specifically they need. So, for instance, you might be dealing with some partners who have fully functioning or rudimentary GIS in place, and you might have others who have nothing at all. We need to know this about the different participants so we know how they fit together and how they're going to work together and what problems they have that you're going to solve. And you need to say that everybody, and you need to demonstrate that everybody involved in the grant project, every single local government who's signed on to it is going to participate in it and is going to support it and is going to do this not only during the grant project, but also later on. And keep in mind, again, not everybody's going to have to provide as much support as everybody else. It depends on your model. It depends on your solution. We're not requiring you to follow some cookie-cutter solution. We're just requiring you to figure out how to work together. And let's go to the next slide. Here is something that essentially is a definition of shared services, but it's something that you have to prove in your application, and so you should address each one of these, okay? Each one of these. So how will this project result in permanent, positive, programmatic change? So you have to figure those out. You know, what's going to happen that's going to make this permanent? What are the advantages of it? And how is it really changing the program of managing your records, managing your GIS, so everything functions well, functions together, and is better than it is now? As we know, everything can always be better. And it has to be sustainable. So you have to tell us what your sustainability model is. Who's going to pay for what? How are you going to pay for things? If you're sharing resources, if you're sharing services, if you're sharing people, how are you going to do that sharing? What agreements are you going to put in place, or do you have in place to make sure that that program that you're putting in place can continue to function into the future? And again, one of the ways you're going to do this is show that the participants are committed to supporting the project long term. And that means they're going to be demonstrating it through a letter that they send you, and you're going to be explaining in your grant application what you're going to do, what setup you're going to have to make sure this happens. You know, administratively, how is this going to run? But we'll give you some hints on demonstrating sustainability. One is you can have an IMA. You have an IMA in place, and if you already have it in place, send it to us. If you don't have it in place, then tell us what you expect to be some of the features of it, and you can work on this IMA during the application, not the application, but the grant project time as well. Another way to demonstrate sustainability is to send us resolutions from people's boards saying, you know, we agree to this, we're behind this project, we have agreed that we're going to provide this kind of support, that kind of support, etc. If you don't have enough time for a board resolution, get the chief administrative officer of the organization to write a letter demonstrating that. If you already have policies and procedures that are guiding such an arrangement, you know, you already have a shared services arrangement and you want to just add a different feature to it, show us the written policies and procedures. For some people, they're actually going to have a fee structure. That means that for some people, they're going to, you know, charge somebody some fee for the services they provide. Perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable. Just tell us what it is. We want to see what it is. We want to be able to evaluate whether it's something that's sustainable, that the local governments can afford or not, and demonstrate how it is sustainable. and staffing. There's nothing in the world that runs a GIS more than staff. Take away staff in a GIS and you have the most useless thing in the entire world. People are always the most valuable thing that you have. And so what staff are you going to have to run this GIS? If it's going to be a couple of people working part-time 6 months out of the year, it's not going to work. So we need to know that there's enough staffing to keep this GIS going. And the amount of staffing needed, of course, is going to depend on the size of the GIS, the complexity of the GIS, the number of participants involved. And so tell us that stuff. Make us happy. So now that we've given you a little taste of some of the requirements, let's go into the entire project narrative and tell you about it. So here is the way that you need to think about this. You need to think about it mathematically, numerically. You need to get the most points to win. The higher your points, as they're averaged out, the more likely you're going to get a project. When we run out of money, we review applications from the highest rated ones in each category to the lowest rated ones. And when we do that, we sometimes run out of money. When we run out of money, anything with a score below the point where we ran out of money does not get funded. And so one of the reasons are you're always going to not get funded because there's something weak about your grant application. But it is often a difference of 1 point between getting funded and not getting funded. So every time you write anything in the project narrative or the budget narrative, read it over again and said, would I give myself the full 5 points? Because everything is worth 5 points and then it's multiplied by a number. But did I get the full 5 points? Is there something that I would have to add for people to think that I shouldn't get the 5 points? If so, do it over. There are 4 parts to the project narrative, and we'll talk about them one by one. So, and this is what I've taken out here is I've taken out that we're looking at the statement of the problem here in this section right here. So in the statement of the problem, they have a couple of things that they tell you. Actually, one second. This is actually out of order. So we're going to talk about this out of order. This does not come in the statement of the problem. It comes later on. So these are the general application requirements. And I should have them with the GIS requirements, but I put them in the wrong place. So when you get to them, answer these questions in the right section. Don't listen to where I've put them. And make sure you do this. First, tell us how this is a records focus. This is actually particularly important with the GIS. We have received GIS applications where the records that they were talking about were USGS, maps that they had, maps they got from the county, and other things they got from, private or other sources, and had no data that was uniquely created by the local government itself or part of the local government itself. We want a records focus. A good GIS grant is going to focus on something like, we have all these old maps of pipes and sewers and all of that. They're getting in bad shape. We have no way to quickly figure out everything and understand it as a whole. And so the GIS is going to give us that. And when we put the GIS in place, what we're going to do is we're going to have all of these plans scanned, so they're going to be in place. We're going to know where things are. We're going to digitize them. We're going to be able to figure out things much more faster, and we're going to be able to have web access to this so people can get it more efficiently. And that's getting to a whole bunch of records things there. We're looking at the need for access to records. We're looking at the need to make sure records don't get destroyed because they're in bad shape. We're getting to the fact of making sure we're keeping records long enough. We're also saying you could also include their plans for getting rid of the records if and when you didn't need them anymore. Some records you keep forever. So let's say adherence to archive standards and guidelines. You need to think about, in every case, what are any standards and guidelines that apply in this case, and then follow them. Unfortunately, in the GIS world, one second, as I hiccup, in the GIS world, we do have some old guidelines for GIS, needs assessment, development. They don't really count anymore. The most important GIS guideline that you're going to follow probably is if you're doing any imaging. If you're doing any imaging, you have to follow our imaging guidelines, and you have to tell us how you're following the imaging guidelines. We give you minimums. You need to tell us if you're going to do the minimums or what else. You're going to have to tell us the file format you're using, read through the imaging guidelines, find out about them. If you have questions, talk to us. We have people across the state again in regions, and we have us here in Albany. Another thing that you'll have to follow is the retention schedules. You have different retention schedules for different local governments. Make sure you're following those, and make sure you're demonstrating that you're following those. Those are some of the things that you need to talk about. And if you need to think about that more, talk to people. Find out what else there is. Increase capacity. If there's anything you should be able to prove with a good GIS application, a good GIS project, is that at the end of it, you're going to have increased capacity. You're going to be able to get to records much more faster, much more quickly. I'll try to speak in English from now on. You're going to be able to distribute records more easily. You're going to be able to store them more easily, better, let's say. You're going to be able to back them up more easily. You're going to be able to protect them more easily. And you're even going to be able to run your operations more easily. If you've got a water and sewer department trying to, manage the basic work of their unit, and they don't have maps that they can rely on, or are easy to find, or in good shape, that's a real capacity squeezer. So you can really show this. And then, even though it's already addressed in the shared services requirements, address this again. How are you going to maintain this forever? Make sure that everybody says they're going to do it. That's intent, but really it comes down to ability. Are we going to believe you that you have the ability to maintain this? You have to prove that to us. You have to give us information, data, evidence that will make us believe that, and that's what has to happen. I always say us, but it's a bunch of grants reviewers, most of which are not the state archives, just so you know. One other general application requirement is sometimes you need supporting documentation, such as 3 quotes, and I'll tell you when you need them. And if you ever need this stuff, you need to make sure that you've included it. The grants booklet steps you through all of these requirements, 1, 2, 3. If you go to about page 75 of the book, you can just follow them in order, address the ones that are applicable to you, don't address the ones that are about different category types or things like that. Okay. Geez, I already told you something about adherence to guidelines and standards. So this pretty much tells you what the guidelines are. It really gets to the digital imaging one here. There are guidelines within our workshops and publications. We don't have any publications or workshops really specifically focused on GIS anymore. And if you got some advice from State Archive staff, you can tell us about those as guidelines. And if so, mention the staff person. So here are your GIS category requirements. You already know the first one. There's no way you've forgotten that. It has to be shared service project. You have to show that you're coordinating the GIS regionally. So here is the idea behind this. The idea behind this is, my goodness, why isn't every county in the state working with local governments within its borders to keep a GIS alive, to share the work of the GIS, and to give everybody the value of a GIS at less cost? And so we really want that to happen, but sometimes it doesn't. So if it doesn't, still, if there's a county or another local government that has some sort of GIS capacity, capability, data, make sure that they're working with you a little bit, that, tell us how you're going to be able to take advantage of something that they have. Tell us, how if in the future there's some way to sort of coordinate everything, bring everything together, and do everything, together, that you'll be able to do it. And again, explain the need for the GIS project. It's already been asked you again. It's being asked again. GIS projects are really looked at closely merely because they sometimes fail to address the records issues. So explain the need and focus on the records. And you need to tell us any records, you know, any applications for GIS that you've had before. Tell us about those. So, you know, if you've had one before, why isn't this one overlapping that one? Why is it not doing work that the other one had already done? Things like that. Again, identify the records involved. Tell us how the project will help you better manage the records. And of course, I already told you, follow the imaging guidelines. So, what can you ask for in a GIS? You can ask for these things. You can ask for data conversion costs. You can ask for anything to help you improve access to those records, either internally or to the public. A major thing that records management is about is access to records. With, you know, web-based GIS now being, you know, in its middle age, this is something that should be in every one of your applications. If your GIS is not increasing access in some way, it is not working. So always think about that. If at all possible, you should have some plan, some way to use the GIS to help you control the retention of data. This could be, you know, a plan for how often you update data and how long you keep the data that hasn't been updated. It can be a plan for figuring out how to keep historical data so that you can make sure that you can go back as far back as you need to see things. Geospatial data is unbelievably rich. If we had a store 100 years worth of data like that, it could be very, very valuable to the world. Are you trying to do that? If so, tell us about it in the application. Ensuring security of the record should always be something that you think about and tell us about, and that is a records management function, because if you can't keep the records secure, if people can destroy them or change them, you're not doing a good job creating your records. We do allow you to create a base map as part of the application still. You know, it's possible that that will disappear in the future, but that does exist. And you know, it might help you build capacity to transfer data. I'm trying to think if there's any way that this is different from access, and it might just mean moving records back and forth, et cetera. There are people who, for instance, have, you know, been able to take, because they've set up a GIS with digital stuff, they now can figure out ways to do things in the field better. But I got to tell you one thing about working in the field, because this has hurt a number of grant applications, at least marginal. It hasn't caused them to lose funding, but we can't give you, wait a second, I probably said this on the next page. Yeah, I say it on the next page, so I'll talk about it here. Here's what you can't get. You can't get a needs assessment. We used to fund needs assessments all the time. It used to be a major thing we did do. Now we don't fund needs assessments at all. If you have a needs assessment for your GIS, to prove it, then you should submit that GIS. If you have not created a needs assessment and you're building or proposing to build a GIS from scratch, you have to give us some evidence why your plan for building this GIS is solid. And one of the ways to do this is to say, here is a situation, a group of people with a GIS similar to what we have. And so we're just going to take their model and we're going to put their model in place, and then give us the details of their model. You know, if you can demonstrate there's a functioning GIS doing just about what you want to do, it's working well, that's good enough, and you won't need to do a needs assessment if you're in that situation. Here's what we can't fund. Projects to essentially create data. So that means that you cannot have GPS units. So if lots of people want GPS units, we know why. We agree about the value of them, but the problem with us is that we no longer fund any data creation. We only fund data conversion, and so GPS but is data creation. You're going out and, you know, finding points on the Earth. The other thing is, since it doesn't fund data creation, it doesn't really fund, you know, like ruggedized laptops for field work or anything like that. either, because we're only going to focus on more basic things, not the actual sort of day-to-day work that people do with GIS, but setting it up, taking care of the records, and making sure the records are in good shape so people can go out in the field and use them well. Obviously, if you hired a surveyor to do work, that would be creating data too, so that's ineligible.
Hey, Jeff, can I ask one question? If
Absolutely.
the community already has a GPS, can they utilize that GPS to do data quality control or anything like that on the points or the information that is?
I got it. It's a good question, and you sent that to me in email, and I forgot about it. And I'm sort of chewing that one over, because theoretically that's still, if you needed to pay for anybody to do that, that would still count as data creation, and so we couldn't fund it. But if you said you were going to do this yourselves using the GPS that you had, and that it was going to be helpful to the GIS and be something that you contributed to the project, that would be fine. But we can't fund it. That's what I'm going to say, is we can't fund it because it's still creating data. So what I would do is twist it around and say, that's fine. Find a way to do it yourself and say, if we do it ourselves, this is what we're contributing to the project, because one of the things you have to show is contributions to the project. I sort of sometimes wish that we could have an exception for this kind of stuff to allow it, but the rule covers every single grants category we have, and so we don't have an exception just for GIS for this.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because yeah, I love questions that make me think. And it shows that you're thinking too, which is what everybody needs to do for a grant application to work. So, creation of data with GPS, not allowable. But any software application that does not manage records as its primary purpose is ineligible. Now, we actually don't count the GIS system itself, so as being something that doesn't manage records as its primary purpose, because really that's what it does. It functions a lot like a document management system. Its main goal is to manage records, and then at the end, what you do is you use it to support your work, to make decisions, everything like that. But that last bullet can hurt you if you talk about the GIS just in terms of sort of traditional ways we think of GIS instead of talking it in records terms. So don't let that happen to you. Imaging requirements are those requirements that you need to follow. So a little bit to tell you, there's the section of the narrative they go into. And because I haven't made this clear, let me tell you this. If the narrative tells you to answer a question in this particular part of the narrative, always answer in that part of the narrative. Even if it duplicates another, even if you had to say it already someplace else, always say it here. And don't answer things that aren't supposed to be answered there. Just make sure everything is set in the right place. And the reason is, you get credit for information given only if you give it in the right place. So this is a little test of people's ability to answer questions in the right place, I know. But it's like filling out a little bubble on a standardized test, so we should be good at it. So, imaging requirements, a few things that you need to tell us. In addition to other requirements that you can read of in the grants booklet, we need to know the series, titles, and dates of the records you're dealing with. So, what are the records you're dealing with? Are you dealing with certain maps of from certain years? Tell us about them. Are you dealing with tabular data that you create or maintain in some way? Tell us about it. Tell us every bit of data, all the records that you're dealing with. And these will be records of the local government, things that you create or you change or you receive in the course of your work. And you can also mention other data that you need to do things. But here we're just focused on the records of the local government that you might be imaging. Tell us the number of images that you'll get, because that tells us the price, and all imaging is based on number of images. and tell us for the records the retention period, which is how long they need to be kept, and give us the schedule item number. So for instance, the MU1 is the schedule for municipalities, towns, villages, cities, and fire districts. And so if you're a municipality, tell us in the MU1 what's the number of the item that tells us the retention of these records. That way the people can look it up, verify it, make sure you're doing the right thing. And tell us about the condition and size of these records. And guess what? In GIS, so often, size is a very important thing because you'll often be working with maps and plans, and we need to know how big those maps and plans are working. So, moving on. You have to demonstrate that you coordinate with other local governments. So provide letters from local governments saying, yes, we want to be involved. If you don't have a letter from a local government, we don't have that evidence, so we need that. Tell us how you're going to share data and expertise, work together during the grants period. This is as important as telling us how it's going to happen afterwards. And indicate how you will ensure what I'm calling conformance with extant GISs. This means in your area, or maybe in other places again across the state, how are you guys working together so that you're making the most use of data that's there and you're able to share data, stuff like that. And indicate how you're going to reduce redundant effort. How are you going to save money because you're saving people from doing the same thing twice. A couple of data conversion rules. Even though it's a little redundant, you can digitize paper geospatial records pretty much any time. If you tell us you need them in order to work, you can digitize them. You can also, this does seem contradictory because it is, because you can georeference paper records. The reason that we allow this is because we consider this part of the digitization of the geospatial records. Notice that still doesn't let you use GPS or survey. And you can also convert digital data. Now, people don't do this all the time, but what if you have digital data that's in a format that you can't use or won't be in the most valuable form? In that form, you can get money from us to convert those to the right format for you. So, increased capacity is pretty much where are you going to say, and this is in, these general requirements, where you're going to say how you're going to develop or enhance the capacity of your records management program or system. So here's what I would do. One is, when you say system, think GIS. That GIS has got to help you manage the records. So how is it going to be better after this grant? And your records management program, think about this. Let's go back to these people. Basements full of moldy, torn, disorganized records and getting damaged all the time, hard to use. Well, the capacity of your records management program will be increased enormously if now everybody will know where those records are all the time because they'll be in the GIS in an easy-to-find place, very logically arranged, and you can get to them quickly. That is an enormous improvement in capacity, and you can even talk about how much time you save. Keep in mind that this is one thing that we're not going to pay for. So, and this comes under increased capacity. We can't pay for ongoing operational costs. So you're probably not going to have any in this, but if you do, we can't support them. This next one, we can't pay for records accumulating since completing a project. This means if you already had a GIS and you took a bunch of maps and you converted them digitally, and then you made a bunch of maps later and you only kept them in paper and you wanted to convert those, well, you can't convert them all. You should have been converting them yourselves. You should have taken over that responsibility. We can't pay for software and hardware upgrades. The one change for this, there are two things to keep in mind here, and they're kind of specific. In terms of hardware, we do pay for storage. So if you have hardware that's focused on storage, and I mean, if you need hardware just to start the GIS, that's possible. But if you need hardware for storage because of increased storage capacity because of a project, that is eligible. Doesn't mean you'll get it, but it means you have the opportunity to argue for it. And for software, even though we don't pay for software upgrades, if the software is going to provide greater records management functionality than you have now, you can make the argument based on that. And so if you have questions about that, probably best to give me a call. Too bad I forgot to put my telephone number on this little show here.
Jeff, can I ask you one question?
Go, please.
Related to the software and hardware, there's a lot of cloud computing now going on these days. Would you pay for instance, if somebody wanted to get started with a cloud application, so they wanted to pay for like a subscription, it's usually like a yearly subscription thing, would that be something that you pay for the first year and then they'd be on their own, or would they not be able to get money for that?
The way I read it is that you're eligible for that for the first year. And what I would say is, you know, you need to get this going. This is going to be both your storage venue and your access venue for these records. And, you know, then after the first year, after the grants period, you're on your own.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So payroll is very strange, but we can't pay for anybody unless they're working directly on the grant project. And if you have people already on your payroll, we can't pay them directly unless they work in addition to the hours that they normally work. So just keep it in mind. It can come up sometime. And we don't give you money to redo a project. If you failed before and you didn't do the project, we'll give you some money. But if you did the project, then you let everything get bad, we're not paying for it a second time. So intent and ability to maintain, remember this is one of the big things that you need to argue when you're talking about requirements. Tell us how you can keep this going. Some things are, how are you going to make sure people are trained so that they can continue to use the GIS to take care of the records and even to do their work. What are the policies and procedures you're going to have? You know, are you going to have audit trails to tell you to make sure people are doing anything right? And, very important one, have you budgeted for upgrades and maintenance? And so I would think really hard about that one. Supporting documentation, this is just very basic things. The big one for you is going to be the vendor quote form and the detailed quotes. So if you're getting some kind of services, most likely these would be services for imaging, or if you're purchasing equipment over $10,000, then you need to fill out, then you need to get 3 quotes or tell us why you don't need to get 3 quotes. You have to fill out a vendor quote form, and you need to give us the RFQ that you put out asking for these quotes. So we need to see all of those. If you forget these things, it can mean your grant does not get funded. So keep that in mind, and, you know, read the stuff about the vendor quote forms carefully. And here it is here. I've told you all that it means on the last slide, so this just gives you it a little bit more, and it tells you the exceptions to the need for 3 quotes. If you have somebody on, if you're using somebody on a state contract, if you're using a preferred vendor such as through NYSID, and if you're doing imaging, you should go through NYSID to get a quote, by the way. If you're using a sole source vendor, that means there's nobody else to go to. Or if you have a vendor already under contract by a local government. So that, you know, you're already working with this vendor, it doesn't make sense to bring in anybody else in. Sole source vendor, we have a real strange thing. If you're buying Esri products, we essentially consider Esri a sole source vendor. So you can keep that in mind, and you can probably guess why we do that. So here is the whole grant narrative real quickly. Statement of the problem, you tell us our problems. And your problems, and you tell us them really good, really well. Tell us why everything's so bad. This is an unbelievably important part of the application because you have to prove your problems. Intended results is why you're going to say how everything's going to be better. So we have problems here, we have things better here. They're going to be a one-to-one, you know, thing. Over on the problem, you'll have one thing. The intended results, you'll tell us how things will be better. This is before you tell us how they're going to be better, how you're going to get there, and that's the plan of work. In the plan of work, you have to tell us exactly how much time it's going to take, what the work is going to be, and that should be really the focus of it. That's where you address all these general category requirements and other requirements that we've just gone over in so much detail. So, and this is where you're going to tell us who will do each job. This is the most important part of your application. This should be detailed, long, clear, and shouldn't be confusing, shouldn't have words that it doesn't have, but it should have enough meat that everybody knows what's going on. Local government support is only 10 points, but 10 points can mean a lot. So any support that any of the local governments involved in the project will be providing now or in the future should be in here, must be in here. That's how you make sure you can get funded for that. One good thing to tell you about the project budget is it has a bunch of project codes, etc., but most importantly is it is worth 25 points. It is worth a quarter of the grant application. Some people leave this grant, this blank. If you leave it blank, you have almost no chance of being funded. Here you have to justify everything single expenditure. It doesn't matter what you said about it before. Say it again. Why is this a reasonable cost? Why is it not too expensive? Why is the solution you have really a good solution, really the best solution? And why do you need this project for the project to succeed? How will the project fail if it doesn't have this? Because if you can't show how the project's going to fail without it, it's going to get cut. So I've told you most of this. Provide information where it's requested in the narrative. Address all the requirements directly. Make sure that you're showing that both people in records management, like the clerks, and people in IT, like the GIS folks, are involved to make sure that they're working together. This is essential to a GIS thing. And what I always tell people is give your application to somebody else. Tell them to read it. Tell them to give you their ideas. Tell them to be as mean as they can, and so that you can make sure it's good. And then when you read the application, make sure it makes sense together. Sometimes we write things and we don't really put everything together as well as we need to. If you need help online, if you go to our website, then go to grants, then to go to our grants, which is the Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund. You can find the online application guide. Talk to the archives. If you don't know your regional advisory officer, you can find them online, or you can drop me a line. And also talk to people in the grants unit, especially if you have sort of technical issues with running with the eGrant, or what the rules are on things that you need, or talk to Albany-based staff. We do have a few people here who know a little bit of about GIS and can talk about it. And also, you know, feel free to send me an email at this email address, or to give me a call if you want at this telephone number. So it's my job to help people put together good grant applications. So if you have some questions that we don't get to answer today, feel free to call me, and certainly look to other local governments, other colleagues who have done something like this before. And so now we're to the questions. I didn't leave an awful lot of time for that, Nikki, but I'm ready for any of them. Wow, Linda has a question here. It says, what about the 20% MWBE participation? Linda, that's a good question that I didn't get into just because I was trying to focus on GIS, but I can tell you. This year, there's the requirement that 20% of the cost of a grant application, only in cases when the grant application is over 25%, has to fill out extra paperwork to show how to talk about its compliance with the minority and women-owned business enterprises. And so the thing to keep in mind about this, there are lots of them. One is that this is only if you're in 25, if you're only at $25,000 or more. The other reason you have to keep in mind is it's only for a part of the cost. It's not for all of them. So look and find out exactly what it's for. What you need to do is try to find minority and women-owned business enterprises. There is, for instance, one GIS vendor that is an MWBE. You need to, show that you gone out, tried to find these people, et cetera. We do know that it is 20% is a very high goal. I'm not sure that we're going to need it, but what you have to do is always show a good faith effort. And so one other thing I want to tell you is that this does not affect the review of your grant application. We do not take this into account when we think about how good your grant is. So if you are running out of time to do it right now, do not do it for the application. You can do it after you get awarded funding. To me, that's the best time to do it. Don't waste your time. If Linda, if you want to talk to me about it more, certainly give me a call, or Dennis Meadows in the grants unit, because we can go on forever. So now we have a question from Mary Susan Knaus. I don't know if the case pronounced, sorry. Can you upgrade digital records? Had parcel data matched up with ORPS data comes in mind is a really interesting thing. What I would do in this case is I would call it a data conversion project. And I would do two things. I'd say this is a data conversion project that we need in order to manage these records better. And in order to do this into the future, what we're going to have to do is develop a plan to make sure that we don't get in this situation again. Unfortunately, since it's coming from ORPS, I don't know how well we're going to be able to do that second part, but at least try to think about talking to ORPS and working this out, because this could be very valuable to people.
And we have one other question there too, is that this was from Heather. She's wondering, what are some common problems local government are having that are successfully getting grants?
The problems that, what are they, okay. Let me think of all of them. So in order to do that, I'll repeat some of them. One is that they don't have a records focus. Happens all the time. That's the most common thing. The second is they might say they have a records focus, but they don't have any records that are their own. They have data from other places, but they don't have records that they created, that they modified, that they received, in the course of business. Somebody transfers it to them when they're, sending in, I don't know, it could be development plans and things like that. Other things, what kills grants all the time is not making sure that they've addressed every single requirement required of that particular grant. So sometimes people skip over the imaging requirement because they're a GIS grant, and it doesn't say under the GIS grant what the imaging requirements are, because that's under the imaging section, but it tells you to look there. So make sure you address all of those requirements. The thing that really hurts you is not following the guidelines as carefully as possible. And for next year, what's going to hurt you, so for this coming year, the one that people are writing grants for now, is if you don't answer your narrative questions where they're supposed to be answered, that can hurt you. You have to answer it where it should be. The strange thing about that is that's more to help us make sure that, to verify that we haven't said anything incorrect in our grants letters rather than anything else. But it's very important so we can make sure that people are doing a good job.
And then there was one other question will this grant program be available next year?
We're going to still have our grants program. We've had our grants program since we announced our first grants program in 1989. So we're essentially about to have, later this year we'll have our 25th anniversary. We definitely expect to be around next year, and we definitely expect to have GIS grants next year. I do not see them going away. So, and that's a good question, because you might not be ready right now. You might not feel like spending every waking hour for the next 2 weeks working on a GIS grant application. So if not, do it next year. Give us a call. Particularly feel free to give me a call, just because I do more talking about GIS grants than anybody. And so I should be able to help you out. And that's good.
Are there any other questions? And if somebody wants to ask a question directly, we can unmute you. If you just want to click yes on the feedback, we could unmute you if you want to ask your question directly. I'm not seeing anything popping up, so I guess if that's it, then thank you everyone for attending today. And this was a recorded session, so we will be putting that up on the GIS Association website there on their YouTube channel and for people to view. So thank you, Geof, for presenting, and it was very informative. So
thanks a lot, Mickey. It was great fun. Good luck, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yep, bye.